Draisaitl back in front to Aaron. He shots and scores! Draisaitl and Desharnais! And Edmonton's won Game 5! Coming all the way back from 3-1 down! Desharnais wins it in overtime!
Cheers, and welcome to this episode of Puck Drop. And on today's episode, we will be interviewing Jack Michaels, Edmonton Oilers play-by-play announcer. We are so excited to have him on the show and ask him some questions. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And without further ado, Jacob, take the water jug.
All right, I'm going to start. The first, by the way, a lot of my questions are based on like what's going on in hockey right now.
Sure.
So the first question I have is, what's it like to watch Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl on a nightly basis? Because, like, obviously we see the highlights and stuff like that, but you get to watch them all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, you're obviously talking about two of the top 5 players in the world right now. Draisaitl won the scoring title this year. He's going to win the Most Valuable Player award as well. Connor McDavid is, as you both know, won the MVP a couple years ago. You're talking about elite athletes in the absolute prime of their career. They obviously have a tremendous amount of symmetry when they're on the same line. But what's really gotten Edmonton into a playoff position this year is Draisaitl's ability to kind of succeed independently on his own line. And he's always had that ability. He showed it in the playoffs a couple of years ago when Edmonton went to Game 7 of the second round. But this year he's found a new level. And coming off a 50-goal season, he was heading in that direction again this year. I would not have been surprised had the season played itself out in its entirety if he had caught Ovechkin and Pastrnak for the Rocket Richard. So two phenomenal players, McDavid, blinding speed, Draisaitl, a blend of power and underrated speed. I mean, I don't think people understand how big Draisaitl is, especially how wide he can make himself when he's barreling his way to the net, but it is a potent 1-2 combination and no doubt the reason behind Edmonton's resurgence in the standings.
All right.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, I'm not sure he would have caught Pastrnak or Ovechkin, but he definitely would have hit 50 goals again. And I saw something, if Kucherov last year had like 128 points, Draisaitl was on pace to at least match that.
He was going to go over that. I mean, he was. I think Edmonton had 11 games left, and what did he need, 15 points or something? I mean, he was. Yeah. He was absolutely on fire. Look, and again, if you look at Draisaitl's numbers leading up, the reason I said he was on pace to maybe catch Ovechkin and Pastrnak, look at his numbers the last month. I mean, he was just on fire playing with Nugent Hopkins and Yamamoto. So the momentum he had built up, I'm telling you, he would have been right there. And, it's too bad the season's gone on pause here, but I feel like, in a kind of bizarre playoff scenario where teams are going to be fresh out of the gates. You look at Edmonton's start this year. They exploded out of the gate and were ready to roll. I mean, they were 7-1. So if Edmonton can do something like that again, they're going to be a force to contend with in the playoffs. It's like having two great pitchers in a short series. You get those guys hot, and there's no telling how far Edmonton could go.
Yeah, definitely. Ryan, do you want to add, or Jordan, which one of you is going to?
Yeah, I'll ask you a question. I don't know how much you'll know about this because, of course, you're a broadcaster for the Oilers, but do you think Jack Hughes is the next Connor McDavid? Now, if you ever talk to me, you'll know my opinion on Jack Hughes, but what do you think?
I've only seen Jack Hughes play one game. Maybe I saw him. I think I saw him play twice.
Yeah,
the Oilers swept the Devils last year.
This season.
Yeah, the Oilers swept the Devils this year, and they shut them out the second game. I could tell you in the games I saw, Jack was a lot more visible at home. On the road, he and the rest of the team kind of disappeared. It was not close, and I will tell you this, Jordan, and I don't know what your prior comments have been on this, but my initial impression of Jack Hughes is it'd be unfair to start putting him in Connor McDavid's class.
Exactly. That's what I've been trying to tell
Yeah.
everybody. Everyone's like, he's such a disappointment. I'm like, give him a year. Everyone's different.
Here's where I think Jack Hughes is going to end up. I think Jack Hughes is going to be a guy a lot like a Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. Again, I've only seen him play twice in highlights. I think he's a very good player. I think he's, a 70, 75-point guy. Do I see Jack Hughes necessarily exploding to a 100, 110-point type of player? He's going to have to make some improvements to his game. He does a lot of things very well, but he doesn't have blinding speed. He doesn't have he doesn't have McDavid's speed. He doesn't have Matthews' shot. He does a lot of things really well. He's a very good player. He is a guy that I think has a little more developing to do than, say, a Connor McDavid, a Sidney Crosby. I don't see Jack ripping up the league in his first 2 or 3 years. The next 2 or 3 years are going to be vital for him in terms of where he eventually falls on the landscape. But I do think you've got a very good player for years to come.
Yeah, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think this year was probably disappointing for most Jack Hughes fans because he was hyped up to be really good out of the gate, but that's kind of unfair. I thought that he shouldn't have come to the NHL immediately because, it's kind of unfair to put him in that situation. But yeah, you're right. The next 2 to 3 years are going to be vital for Jack. It'll determine whether he'll be a superstar or like you said, a Ryan Nugent-Hopkins type.
Yeah.
You can't judge a baby if he struggles to speak.
And let's face it, he doesn't have a ton of great players around him either.
That's true. That's a good point. He doesn't. And
the Devils have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, he hasn't exactly had great line mates. He should have been with Heischer and stuff. But I agree that development will be vital, which is why you need to get a better coaching staff. I think firing John Hines was a great move, not only because he shook up the lines too much, but because you need to develop Jack Hughes a lot more than what John Hines can provide.
All right, Ryan, do you want to ask your question now?
Yeah, I'll go. So to many, this might seem like a wasted question, but actually, if you think about it, this might be pretty interesting. You've been to almost all the arenas in the NHL, probably at this point, all of them. Which arena do you think is the best fan experience?
That's a good question.
Just from your viewpoint.
I love Chicago. I think the United Center is a great place. I don't know whether you guys have ever YouTubed the national anthem. It starts with the national anthem. The guy who sings the anthem there is off the charts. They got 22,000 giving the anthem a standing ovation throughout. It's really a cool experience to be a part of. Mm-hmm. So I have a lot of time for the United Center in Chicago. Madison Square Garden, it's hard to beat the world's most famous arena. It's a special place. I mean, when I was in college, actually, the Rangers won their first cup in 54 years, and I had a chance to go to a number of those games. I was working for HBO Sports at the time. So I have some good memories from that cup run, and it's, the iconic roof. You're in New York. The city's alive. It's a lot of fun. In Canada, I think Montreal's Bell Center is unreal. It's a very steep building, so you can have a seat in the last row of the upper deck and still have a great view of the ice. They know their hockey. It's got an old school feel. It's not a super old building, but it feels like it could be. So those are the three that immediately come to mind: Chicago, New York, and Montreal. Probably no surprise to any of you three.
And those are
all
biggest...
original six, right?
Yeah.
It makes sense.
I thought you were going to mention Vegas.
Yes, same.
Really,
I was
Vegas?
just about to follow up with that. I was like, what do you think? Vegas.
You bring up Vegas. It is I like Vegas. It's hard for me to, they're 3 years in, right? I want to see what happens when the Raiders come in and maybe the team struggles a little bit. They've got the advantage of everything's new, right?
Yeah.
It's like when you guys got your first new longboard. It's awesome for a while, but it ends up leaning against the garage after a while. And so that's kind of what I want to see what Vegas looks like once all the novelty is worn off. But you're right. It is a lot of fun to go to a game in Vegas. You walk. I actually walk from my hotel to the arena, and it's a great tailgating scene. It's like kind of a football atmosphere where people are, having beers and having a good time, getting going before the game. It's a nice tailgating experience. So, you're right. For right now, I think you're right. Vegas is probably top 5. That's a very good point.
Yeah, so
okay.
I went to a Golden Knights game. I think it was about last year, and the experience, I was like trying to compare it to a Devils game, and it blew it by.
Well, there's no comparison. I mean, I don't know. I'm probably around. I see Jordan's got his pullover on now. Ryan has a Yankee picture in the background, so he might be a Ranger guy, but it looks like he's got Devils colors.
I'm a
Yankees.
Devils.
We're all Devils.
Okay, normally Yankees guys are also Ranger fans, so that might be a little bit of a difference. But I'm just telling you, the Rock is one of my least favorite buildings to visit.
I don't blame you.
Not much atmosphere.
It really is kind of.
Well, it has atmosphere when the Devils are good, but they haven't been good for a while.
They haven't been good since you guys were about 6 years old or 7 years old. It's been a while.
But the beginning of this year, there was so much hype around the team. I was at opening night, and it was sold out, and there was like cheering and yelling the entire game. But like that's either that or Game 3 from 2017, or actually no. The most exciting game I've been to at the Rock was Stanley Cup Finals in 2012.
Right.
But like that, you
can't
can't
those days when we were excited.
That's what I was referring to. The Taylor Hall MVP year was a good one. There was actually a lot of hype 2 years ago. I don't know whether you guys remember this, but Edmonton actually opened up its season playing New Jersey and Sweden. And Jersey came out and laid the boots to Edmonton and played a very good game. And they started, I believe, 4-0 or 5-0 that year, and couldn't build on it. And that the disappointment from that season, I think, really put John Hines, on thin ice. And when they didn't get it going this year, that's when they made the change. But for the Devils, there are a few guys that I really feel like they've got to get going or they got to move on from. And Pavel Zacha and Miles Wood are guys that I look at with a ton of talent. Especially, I love Miles Wood. I don't know why he hasn't necessarily been able to put it together for a full season, but he's a guy along with Zacha, and they've got a handful of guys whose pedigree should have them in a better spot than they currently are. But right now, I mean, when I think of the Devils' best player, and I know they got Jack Hughes, and he might have the most talent, but the guy that immediately comes to mind when I think of the Devils' best player is a guy like Blake Coleman, an underachiever, an overachiever.
Right? Oh my God!
And they need more guys to play above their expected level, like Blake Coleman, and right now they don't have it.
We're on the same wavelength. That's why Blake Coleman's one of my all-time favorites.
They have a bunch of guys who've underachieved to this point, in my opinion.
The only players on the Devils.
Their goaltending is horrendous.
Well, besides Blackwood.
Well, we'll see what happens when Blackwood has the number one gig for the whole season. It's a lot different when you come in because the other guy's brutal and you don't have that much pressure on you. I want to see how Blackwood's game holds up over an 82-game season. I have my doubts.
100%, because if you watch, you'd notice that this happens to be a pattern with Devils goalies.
Yeah. Oh, Kincaid was great until they turned it over to him, and then he was terrible.
Well, that's because of Taylor. That's because Taylor Hall was single-handedly carrying the team to the playoffs.
That's true.
Yeah. Well, that's true.
Anyway, Jacob, you want to ask a question?
Well, first of all, what I was going to say before was the only consistent, I think this season, at least for the only players who are the consistent performers for the Devils for at least 3/4 of the season, I'm going to say were Palmieri, Coleman, and Gusev, I'll say.
You
Because
sure?
he had a pretty
You
slow
sure
start,
though?
but after starting like December, until the end of the year, Gusev was pretty consistent.
If you're gonna put Gusev up there, you gotta put Hischier up there.
And Nico, but he was towards the
See,
end.
that's where I think Hughes, to me right now, Hughes feels a lot more like Nico Hischier than Connor McDavid.
That's
He
exactly
feels
what
like-
I'm
We didn't
saying.
really
He
hype
feels
up
like-
Nico.
Yeah, he's going to be a very good player. And I think Nico's a very good player. But the other thing we haven't talked about when it comes to the Devils is they don't have anything going on the blue line right now. They've had a patchwork
Oh my
unit
God.
for years. I mean, the 2012 Devils that made it to the Stanley Cup final might have made it with one of the worst top 6 defense in the history of the league, in terms of getting that far with that defense. And they just haven't gotten any better. I mean, they've brought in one guy after another, kind of spare parts, guys like Mirko Mueller, playing them up and ahead in the line. I mean, Andy Green, I like him, but he never should have been a top 4D man. He's a third pairing guy. And he's a good player, good leader, whatever, but he's a guy. He's not a big guy. And for the Devils to get better, they need 2 or 3 quality defensemen. And I kind of know what I'm talking about on this one because, trust me, for years, Edmonton had the same issue. I mean, just basically an American Hockey League defense. And that's what Jersey has right now. And I don't think that's helped their goaltending either.
Yeah,
In terms of
absolutely.
Kincaid, Blackwood, you put a better defense in front of them, and maybe those goalies can get the job done.
Their best defenseman right now, I'd say, is Damon Severson, but even he
he's
can
been
be
a
pretty
healthy
good.
scratch within the last 2 years. I mean, there's another guy. I mean, yeah, you're right. Damon Severson's maybe the Devils' best guy, but on a real NHL defense, he's probably third pairing at best.
I mean,
I
he
agree
can be
with you.
pretty good offensively. He can be pretty good offensively at times, but there has never been a time in his career where Damon Severson has been better than average defensively. And I'm hesitating saying that.
All right. What do we got next?
So I'll ask the next question. And the next question I have is, what do you think the Oilers' chances are in their play-in series against Chicago? And I know they were the 5th seed and Chicago was the 12th seed, but I'm asking this because, I mean, the Blackhawks still have Taves and Kane and Keith and all these guys who are known to be, playoff performers.
I know a lot of people are looking at that as a bad draw for Edmonton, and they got Corey Crawford in net, who has won a Stanley Cup, obviously, 2 in fact. You've got Keith and Taves and Kane. I think even in a best-of-5 series, though, Edmonton just has better depth at every position. And we were just talking about the Devils on defense. And I'm telling you, I mean, after Duncan Keith, it really dries up on the blue line for Chicago. I mean, they're going to have a guy, Calvin DeHaan, the ex-Islander, who's probably going to be in their top 4, and he hasn't played a game in 7 months. He's been hurt. They don't have much on the blue line. Can they give Edmonton trouble? Absolutely. If Crawford steals a game or Patrick Kane goes nuts, absolutely, they can give Edmonton's problems. But there's a reason that Edmonton was 11 points ahead of Chicago in the standings. I still think the Oilers are a significant favorite. I think they can expose Chicago with their 3rd and 4th line matchups. I think Chicago has some centers that are challenged to play defensively, and I think Edmonton ultimately can break Chicago down. Having said that, they played 3 times this year, and the home team won every time, and Chicago was the home team twice. So, this is not a gimme series for Edmonton. But I still make the Oilers a significant favorite. And I know a lot of people are going to pick Chicago to upset Edmonton. I certainly wouldn't want to put my mortgage on that.
Yeah, we I think it was 2 episodes ago, episode 5, we all did our predictions for the play-in series, and we all predicted Edmonton to win. But
Yeah, I think that's a smart play. A lot of people are gonna take Chicago for the reasons you mentioned, but I don't like their chances.
But I mean, I think we all picked Edmonton, but I don't think any of us said that it was gonna be a sweep. I don't think it's going to be a sweep. I say Edmonton in 4.
Yeah, and that's probably a good call. I mean, I don't think you can. Again, Chicago's got players with a lot of experience, and I think a guy like Patrick Kane or Corey Crawford or Duncan Keith, one of those guys could certainly have a big game in the series and make a difference, and Chicago could get a win. Even in a best-of-5 series, which I think favors Chicago. I mean, short of the series, the more your lack of depth isn't as much of an issue, but I still like Edmonton's chances.
Following up on that, you mentioned Edmonton's depth, and I do agree. I think they're set for the future up front and on the blue line, more up front than on the blue line. But in net, Mikko Koskinen is 31, Mike Smith is 38, and a UFA this summer. What do you think of their future in goal?
Well, they've got some guys down on the farm, Shane Starrett and Stuart Skinner, which they're, certainly hope one of those two pans out. I also think goalies are a commodity that a lot of people feel like they can acquire. You can let someone else develop them and then, acquire one of them in a trade. Look, Edmonton's goaltending was a question mark coming into the season, and both goaltenders have played reasonably well. Koskinen, as you mentioned, is under contract for another couple years after this one. Mike Smith's going to be a UFA, and I wouldn't be surprised the way he's played this year if Edmonton makes him an offer to come back. I don't know what Smith's options are going to be in terms of how many suitors he would potentially have. I do think he's got a lot of tread left on the tire, though, because if you look at Mike Smith's career, he did not play a lot in his 20s. He was mostly a backup in Tampa and Dallas and really didn't play a ton of games. It's not like, he was Corey Schneider where he came into Jersey and was instantly playing 70 games a year. Marty Brodeur playing 70 games a year. That's not Mike Smith. So he's a younger, if you want to call it that, a younger 38 than maybe the numbers would suggest. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that's one of the areas that Edmonton might not be as deep in the years to come. They do hope they get one goalie out of their system. I think all teams are hoping they develop one goalie, and then a lot of teams have the mindset they can acquire a veteran through a trade or free agency. Because
even goalies are weird in the way that 1 year they can play out of their minds, and the next year they can be awful. I mean,
you're like a kicker in football.
Yeah, you look at
one minute you're hitting everything, and then you miss 2 field goals in a game and you're cut. That's just the way it works, and goaltenders are the same. Sometimes they just lose it.
So, my question is, obviously, you know that Taylor Hall wore an Edmonton Oilers uniform as well as the Devils uniform, so you have a very strong opinion of him. What do you think of him? What do you think of his future? What do you think of his performance on the Devils? Just what's your general opinions on him?
Well, I mean, obviously, he led the Devils to their only playoff appearance since the Cup final in 2012. He was the reason. He was by far and away the leading scorer on that team. I think he was 35 points ahead of Heischer. And he had a fantastic season and put the Devils on his back. But in the other years for Jersey, as was often the case in Edmonton, he got a little banged up. Mm-hmm. Was a guy that played 60, 65 games a year instead of 82. When he's healthy, he's one of the best players in the league. When he's not, you miss him. And I think in terms of Taylor Hall's future, it's going to be interesting this year, with his contract up. He's a guy that went from Jersey to Arizona, who was in contention for a divisional title. And even though Hall played fairly well for the Coyotes, they fell off and out of the top 8. Now they're going to be in the play-in series because of the expanded format, but they're a team that was on target to miss the playoffs after Hall got there. And their record was worse when Hall joined the team. Conversely, the Devils seem to improve. Even without Taylor Hall, their record was better. And I think the facts will back me up on this. Their record this year was better, without Hall than Taylor. Than with him. So I don't know what that's going to do to Taylor Hall's value in the marketplace. I don't think that it's Taylor Hall's fault the Devils didn't make the playoffs in 2019 and 2020. I do think it's Taylor Hall's brilliance that got them to the playoffs in 2018. So you can look at it a number of different ways. I know in Edmonton, it was tough for him. He was the best player on a number of bad teams, and he was the best player on probably for 4 of those 6 years he was with Edmonton, or maybe 3 of the first 5, and then Connor McDavid came in, and Peter Chiarelli decided to make the move and send Hall in exchange for Adam Larsson because, as we were just talking about, Edmonton sorely needed some depth on the blue line, and that's why they made that deal. I've often found, I know Taylor, I know his family, I know his mother and father. I never found him anything other than professional and approachable in my dealings with him. I had lots of long conversations with Taylor Hall, both on and off the record, and I always thought he gave me a fair shake. So I have nothing but good things to say about him. And I think this year in free agency will be very interesting to see where he lands.
Jordan.
All right, so real quick, just like a quick answer. Are you in support of the new playoff format? And if not, then what's its biggest problem?
You know what? I am in support of the playoff format. I mean, and I know a lot of people don't like it, but there were 11 to 12, 14 games in some cases to go, and the old joke is if you're not in the playoffs by Thanksgiving, chances are you're not going to finish in the playoffs. But on the other hand, I think it was Ottawa a few years ago that went something like 21-2 down the stretch and got in. And
St. Louis was last.
I don't mind expanding the format and getting some teams in that might not have been realistic candidates to get in had the season played out as per normal. But you know what? We're not in a normal time right now in the world, so I'm all for it. And the more teams in, I suppose, the more fans are going to be engaged when the NHL returns. So I'd go ahead and echo what Connor McDavid said, is this seemed to be the best possible solution. So why not, why continue to bicker and try to go back and forth the way baseball's going? Let's get a deal done and move forward.
What do you think? Do you think there's a possibility that this might change hockey permanently? No, not at all. Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the NHL, doesn't want 24 teams or anything moving forward. He likes the setup with 8 in each conference. Yeah. So I think this is a one-off based on the pandemic.
The only thing I saw is that the NHL might think of permanently – it's a very small chance, but the NHL might think of permanently changing their schedule from December or January to July. That's the only thing I saw.
That won't happen. I think it might happen for the 2021 season simply because the playoffs might not finish mid-October, and then you're looking at really starting the season in December, January. They want to get the full 82 games in. So even if you bypass the All-Star game, that does take you into June and July. But eventually they're going to get back on what all of us would agree is a normal NHL calendar where it begins in October and finishes in April.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah. So should we start wrapping up?
Yep.
Yeah. I think, I think we're gonna have to wrap this up. We hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Puck Drop where we had our first guest. I'm sure we all enjoyed it, and remember to hit that subscribe button down below, and leave a like and comment if you like this format and if we should do have another guest on. So yeah, that's gonna do it for this one. So bye.